Cinderella back to the place from before. The wheels of the carriage stopped in front of the small house at the edge of the village. Cinderella looked through the window, and for a moment it felt as if time had turned back. The same door, the same roof, the same yard where she had once swept every morning. "Is this it?" Lena asked softly. "Yes," Cinderella replied. "Right here." She stepped down from the carriage. There was no crown on her head, no long gown. She was dressed simply, the way she preferred. Only her walk was different, steadier, more certain. The door of the house was closed. Cinderella raised her hand and knocked. There was a sound from inside, footsteps. Something fell. Then the door opened abruptly. "What do you want?" A voice snapped. The woman froze when she saw Cinderella. You are..." Cinderella smiled gently. At that moment, the two stepsisters rushed out of the house. One stumbled, the other bumped into the doorframe. "It's her," they whispered at the same time. Neighbors began gathering in the yard. Someone murmured the Queen. Another stepped closer. Cinderella raised her hand. Silence fell, and then something creaked behind the house. Cinderella turned. "Has that always been there?" she asked. The sound came again, not loud, but clear enough to make everyone turn toward it. "That's the old shed," one of the neighbors said. "It hasn't been opened in years." Cinderella walked toward it without hurrying. The shed leaned to one side, its door slightly ajar. From inside, a small dog appeared, covered in dust, its tail wagging so hard it nearly lost its balance. "Hey!" Lena laughed. "Where did you come from?" The dog ran in a circle and stopped right in front of Cinderella. It looked straight into her eyes, then sat and tilted its head. "Do you remember me?" Cinderella asked, crouching down. "You were here back then." The dog barked happily, as if that was exactly the right answer. A voice called from the house. Cinderella stood up. She glanced at the roof, then at the door barely holding together. The neighbors whispered. Someone nodded, someone else smiled. Small things were starting to be noticed. At that moment, the dog ran back toward the shed and began digging in the ground. Then it stopped and barked. "What did you find?" Lena asked. Cinderella knelt down. Beneath the dirt, the edge of an old wooden box appeared. She lifted it carefully. She opened it. Inside were small objects, a ribbon, a button, an old spoon, and a letter. Cinderella looked at it and took a deep breath. "Looks like this visit will last longer than I thought." Cinderella held the letter in her hands without opening it right away. The paper had been folded many times, its edges slightly worn, as if someone had carried it in a pocket for a long while. "What does it say?" Lena asked, peering over her shoulder. "We'll see," Cinderella said, and carefully unfolded the page. The letter was short, just a few lines written in a familiar hand. Cinderella smiled for a moment, then her face grew thoughtful. "It's from the person who looked after the house after I left," she explained. "He says there's something here that needs to be set right, and it can't be done with a broom alone." One of the sisters frowned. At that moment, the wind caught the old well cover and it creaked loudly. The dog jumped, and the neighbors laughed. "Seems the house disagrees," Lena said. Cinderella looked around. She noticed the crooked window, the sunken step by the door, the shed with its slanted roof. "I won't change everything," she said. "We'll just start small." She pointed toward the shed. The dog barked approvingly and ran over. Lena followed, and the neighbors began handing over planks and rope as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Cinderella rolled up her sleeves. Just then, a thump came from inside the shed, not loud, but clear enough to make everyone turn. "What was that?" someone whispered. Cinderella smiled. They gathered around the shed. The dog was already inside, tail wagging as if pointing the way. Cinderella leaned in and saw that one of the old boards had shifted. "Ah," she said. "That's where the sound came from." Lena stepped closer and pointed down. Cinderella knelt and lifted the board. Beneath it appeared a small space filled with dust and something more. "This isn't just a hole," she said. The neighbors bent down. Someone brought a lantern. The light revealed old steps leading downward. "Stairs?" one of the sisters said in surprise. "There were never stairs here." "Apparently there were," Cinderella replied calmly. The dog went down first, then stopped and barked, as if saying, "Come on." "All right," Cinderella said, "but all together." They descended a few steps and entered a small room. It wasn't dark. There was a tiny window, almost hidden by bushes outside. Inside were shelves, boxes, and many old things. "This must have been a storage room," Lena said, "or something like a secret room." Cinderella looked around carefully. She opened one of the boxes. Inside were a child's apron, an old cup, and a small wooden figure. Cinderella picked it up and smiled. Just then, a noise came from above. Someone was running toward the shed. "Cinderella?" a neighbor called. "More people are coming to help." Cinderella glanced at the room, then at the steps leading up. When they stepped out of the shed, the yard was no longer the same. People were moving back and forth, someone carrying a bucket, another handing over planks, a third clearing the path to the well. "It looks like a small celebration," Lena whispered. "Sometimes that's how the best changes start," Cinderella replied. One of the sisters stood by the front door with her arms crossed, watching everything. "We'll open it," Cinderella said, "not as a secret, as a place that can be used." The sister raised an eyebrow. Cinderella thought for a moment. At that moment, the dog burst out of the shed, carrying an old glove in its mouth. It tripped, fell, then stood up proudly as if it had done something very important. "Well, it looks like we've got a helper," Lena laughed. The neighbors laughed too. The tension faded and the yard grew livelier. Cinderella walked up to the house and touched the wall. A bang sounded from inside. Not loud, but enough to make everyone turn. "What happened?" someone called. The other sister appeared at the window. Cinderella smiled softly. She turned to the people in the yard. Hands went up at once, and the house seemed to sigh. Inside, it smelled of old wood and dust. Light slipped through the windows in thin bands, drawing lines across the floor. Cinderella took a few steps forward and stopped by the stairs. "They always creaked here," she said, "even back then." Lena stepped carefully onto the first stair. It shifted slightly, but held. The neighbors brought tools. Someone handed over a new board, another nailed the old one in place. The work moved calmly, without hurry, as if everyone knew exactly what to do. A noise came from the kitchen. The dog had found a bowl and was rolling it across the floor until it stopped at Cinderella's feet. "Looks like someone's hungry," Lena laughed. Cinderella placed the bowl by the wall. One of the sisters appeared in the doorway. Cinderella looked at her. Just then, a voice called from above. Cinderella climbed a few steps and looked upward. The corridor led to rooms from the past, quiet, closed, waiting. She took a breath. The upper corridor was narrower than Cinderella remembered. Old frames hung on the walls, some crooked, others empty. As she passed, one of them swayed slightly and settled back into place. "It was always like this here," she said with a smile, as if the house were whispering. Lena stopped in front of a door. Cinderella looked at the key hanging on a nail beside the frame. The door opened with a soft sound. The room was small but bright. Through the window they could see the yard full of people. On the floor stood a wooden chest. The dog ran in first and placed its paws on the lid. All right, Lena laughed. "We get it." Cinderella opened the chest. Inside were fabrics, thread, needles, and an old notebook. "This was my mother's," she whispered. She turned a few pages. There were drawings, notes, ideas, how to mend, how to make something from very little. "She always said a home isn't a place," Cinderella said. "It's care." A voice called from downstairs. Cinderella closed the notebook and smiled. Lena nodded. Cinderella looked once more through the window. When they came down from the upper floor, the house already sounded different. It wasn't loud, but there were footsteps, conversations, and quiet laughter. Someone was moving a table, another arranging chairs, a third opening the windows. "I've never seen it like this," one of the sisters said, looking around. Cinderella stopped by the kitchen doorway. Where she had once stood alone, there were now people. One neighbor was handing over bowls, another placing a basket of apples on the table. "This has always been the heart of the house," she said. The dog ran circles around the table, trying to sniff everything at once. At one point, it slid across the floor and nearly collided with a bucket. Everyone burst out laughing. "It looks like it's happy too," Lena laughed. From the yard came the sound of ringing. Small children were running around the well and someone had tied colorful ribbons to the fence. "That wasn't in the plan," Lena said. "The best things never are," Cinderella replied. She looked at the house, the walls, the windows, the doors. Everything was the same, and yet it wasn't. The place no longer held memories only for itself. One of the sisters stepped closer. Cinderella was quiet for a moment. Just then, a voice called from the yard. She smiled and went over. People had gathered around the well. Someone had brought paints, another brushes, a third a basket of flowers. "We thought we'd make it brighter," a neighbor said, gesturing. The well looked a bit sad. Cinderella stepped closer and studied the stones. The children were already painting small suns and dots along the edge. The dog sat beside them, watching seriously as if keeping order. "Don't touch the paint," one child shouted. The dog tilted its head and sat even straighter. "Looks like we have a guard," Lena laughed. Cinderella noticed one of the sisters standing off to the side. She walked over. The sister hesitated, then took a brush and added a small line to the stone. "It never is," Cinderella replied. "But it gets better once you begin." Someone came out of the house holding a sign. Cinderella looked at the empty space. When the sign was put up, the yard seemed to smile. People paused for a moment to look at it. Cinderella turned toward the house. Lena looked at her, curious. Cinderella smiled.